They said I married into the wrong family. Turns out I married into exactly the right one because everything they did to us gave me exactly what I needed to destroy them. My name is Margaret Calloway Hargrove, and I live in a glass house in Buckhead, Atlanta, the kind with a wine cellar that costs more than most people's mortgages and a housekeeper named Rosa who irons the dish towels. My husband, Philip Hargrove III, is the kind of man who wears a Patek Philippe to brunch and tips exactly 15% because, as he says, generosity should have limits. I used to think that was a quirk. I now understand it was a warning. We've been married 11 years. I have one daughter, Lily, who turned 9 last October, and I would burn every square foot of this city to the ground before I let anyone touch her. Anybody, including his parents, especially his parents. Philip's mother, Eleanor Hargrove, is what Atlanta society calls old money with new venom. She wears Chanel to church and talks about grace while she's quietly sharpening knives behind your back. His father, Conrad Hargrove, built the Hargrove real estate empire on handshakes, scotch, and the kind of backroom deals that never get written down. Together, they raised Philip to believe that love is a transaction and weakness is something you punish. I didn't see it clearly until the night of Lily's birthday. By then, I had been sleepwalking through this marriage for 3 years, suspecting things, ignoring things, excusing things, the way women in beautiful houses sometimes do when the alternative feels like free-falling without a parachute. Here's what nobody tells you about wealthy families. The cruelty is quieter, but it cuts deeper. The dinner was Eleanor's idea. Of course it was. She called me on a Tuesday, her voice honeyed and warm, said she wanted to do something special for the baby, wanted to host at the Hargrove Estate in Tuxedo Park, that massive colonial with the circular driveway and the gardeners who work in silence. I hesitated. I always hesitated with Eleanor, the way you hesitate before reaching into a bag you can't see inside. But Lily had been begging to see the estate's indoor pool, and 9 years old is still young enough to believe that grandparents are safe, so I said yes. I ironed Lily's birthday dress myself, pale yellow with white eyelet lace, and I drove us there with a Spotify playlist of her favorite Taylor Swift songs playing, and she sang every single word in the back seat. And for 45 minutes, the world was exactly as it should be. We arrived at 7. There were 8 people already seated at the long mahogany dining table, Conrad and Eleanor at the heads, Philip beside his mother, as always, his sister Rosalind with her husband Tate, their 2 teenagers, Conrad's business partner Fenton Briggs, and Briggs's wife Claudette, who collects handbags the way other women collect regrets. The table was set with Eleanor's imported Italian porcelain, fresh flower arrangements, and candles that smelled like bergamot and money. Lily walked in holding my hand, and everyone smiled at her, the way people smile at children in rich houses, politely, briefly, like she was a piece of decor that had briefly come to life. Rosa, their housekeeper, served the first course, asparagus bisque, plated like a painting, warm bread with herb butter. The conversation circled around Conrad's latest development deal in Midtown, Rosalind's renovation in Virginia Highland, Fenton's boat. Standard Hargrove dinner theater, everyone performing for each other, no one really listening. Lily sat between me and Philip, coloring quietly in the little notebook I always kept in my purse for her. She wasn't bothering anyone. She was being, if anything, more well-behaved than the Hargrove grandchildren, who were on their phones under the table and interrupting adults mid-sentence. Then Rosa brought out the steaks. Dry-aged ribeyes, perfectly seared, plated with roasted fingerling potatoes and broccolini with lemon zest. 1 plate for every adult. 1 plate each for Rosalind's teenagers. And then Rosa came around the corner with a paper plate, a thin, flimsy paper plate that didn't belong within 100 yards of this table, and she set it in front of my daughter. I blinked. I actually blinked and looked again because my brain refused to process it. On the paper plate was a mound of wet dog food, the canned kind, dark brown, glistening, served with a cheap plastic fork. The smell hit the air immediately, that dense, meaty chemical smell that belongs in a pet bowl, not at a birthday dinner. Lily looked at it. Then she looked at me. Her mouth opened slightly, not in tears yet, just in pure confusion, the way children look when the world does something that violates every rule they've been taught. And that's when Conrad Hargrove, patriarch of one of Atlanta's most powerful families, looked directly at my 9-year-old daughter and said, "Eat it or starve." 8 people heard it. 8 people with monogrammed napkins in their laps and $1,400 shoes on their feet heard a grown man say that to a little girl in a yellow birthday dress on her 9th birthday. Rosalind looked at her plate. Fenton Briggs lifted his wineglass. Claudette smoothed her napkin. Philip, my husband, her father, said absolutely nothing. I want you to sit with that. He said nothing. He didn't look at Lily, he didn't look at me. He picked up his steak knife and he cut into his ribeye, and the sound of the blade on the porcelain was the loudest thing in the room. That silence told me everything I had refused to know. I did not yell. I want to be clear about that, because every person in that room probably expected me to yell, expected the scene, the drama, the emotional woman losing control so they could later dismiss everything as hysteria. I am from a working-class family in Decatur. My mother cleaned offices, my father drove a delivery truck. I grew up understanding that in rooms where you have no power, composure is the only currency that matters. So I breathed. I looked at my daughter. I picked up that paper plate with both hands, carefully, like it was evidence, because some part of my brain already knew that's exactly what it was, and I stood up and I looked at Conrad Hargrove and I said, very quietly, "We're leaving." I took Lily's hand, I took the plate, and I walked out of that house without looking back at a single person at that table. Lily asked me in the car why Grandpa Conrad was so mean. I told her that some people are broken in ways that have nothing to do with her, and that she was the most wonderful girl I had ever known, and that we were going to get Dairy Queen and watch a movie and celebrate properly. She cried a little. Then she ordered a blizzard and fell asleep on my shoulder before the opening credits finished. And I sat in the dark of our bonus room with her breathing soft against my neck, and I made every decision I was going to make for the next 6 months right then and there. Because here's the thing about quiet women. We're not quiet because we're weak. We're quiet because we're planning. I had been planning, actually, for longer than that night. I just hadn't admitted it to myself yet. 3 months before Lily's birthday, I had found a receipt in the pocket of Philip's Brioni jacket while sorting clothes for the dry cleaner. It was from the Lowe's Atlanta Hotel, room service for 2. The charge was on a Tuesday night in July when Philip had told me he was in Charlotte for a development meeting. I took a photo of the receipt with my phone. I put the jacket in the dry clean pile. I made dinner. I smiled at my husband when he came home. I filed the photo in a folder on my phone labeled Recipes, because I have been in this marriage long enough to know that when you're building a case, you build it quietly. After the birthday dinner, I called my best friend Nadia the next morning. Nadia Okafor is a family law attorney at a boutique firm in Midtown, and she has been telling me for 2 years to document everything and trust nothing. She's the kind of friend who will bring you wine and also subpoena your husband's phone records without blinking. When I told her what happened at the dinner table, there was a long pause on the line. Then she said, "Margaret, tell me you kept the plate." I told her I had it in a Ziploc bag in the trunk of my car because I didn't know what else to do with it. She told me not to touch it again, bring it to her office Monday, and to write down, by hand, every name of every person at that table and exactly what was said and by whom. She said, "If this goes where I think it's going, that plate is Exhibition A." I didn't understand what she meant yet. By the time I did, it was too late for the Hargroves to stop anything. I spent that weekend performing normalcy with terrifying precision. I made Sunday brunch. I let Philip peck my cheek. I listened to him spend 40 minutes on the phone with Conrad and not once mention what happened at dinner, not once ask how Lily was, not once apologize for his silence. He came to bed at 11, smelling like bourbon and that sharp cedar cologne he's worn since before I knew him, and he was asleep in 6 minutes. I lay there in the dark and I thought about the Lowe's hotel receipt. I thought about the paper plate. I thought about Conrad's voice, flat, certain, without a flicker of cruelty awareness, the voice of a man so accustomed to domination he doesn't even register it as cruelty anymore. I thought about the way Rosalind looked at her plate instead of at my daughter. I thought about Claudette smoothing her napkin. And I thought about the thing I had not yet let myself think fully, that this was not a one-night aberration. This was the Hargrove family telling me something they had been showing me for 11 years, and I had been too deep inside the life to read the message clearly. So let me go back, because the birthday dinner was the explosion, but the fuse had been burning for a very long time. I met Philip at a charity gala in Buckhead when I was 27. I was there as the plus one of a girlfriend, and he was there as the golden son of Conrad Hargrove, holding a champagne flute and looking like a magazine spread for a watch brand. He was charming in the way that very wealthy men sometimes are, attentive, specific, remembering details about what you said 3 sentences ago, and asking follow-up questions that made you feel like the most interesting woman in the room. On our third date, he brought me peonies, my favorite flower, which I had mentioned once, briefly, and I thought, this man listens. I didn't yet understand that listening is also a form of data collection. We married in 18 months. It was a wedding that cost more than my parents' house, held at a vineyard outside Dahlonega, with a string quartet and imported roses, and a cake that had its own Instagram account by the end of the night. My mother wore a dress she'd saved up for 3 months to buy and cried when she saw me walk down the aisle. Eleanor Hargrove wore ivory, not white, ivory, just close enough to make a point, and kissed me on the cheek and whispered, "Welcome to the family, sweetheart," in a tone that, looking back, sounded less like welcome and more like warning. The shift was so gradual I didn't feel it happening. That's how the best traps work. The comments about my background started softly, Eleanor mentioning at dinner parties that I had come from more modest circumstances, with the kind of admiration that is actually condescension wearing a smile. Conrad asking early in our marriage whether I had adjusted to the lifestyle yet, as if I were a rescue animal learning to live indoors. Small things. The way they spoke to Rosa in front of me, flat and dismissive, and sometimes I caught them looking at me after, watching for my reaction, checking whether I would say anything. I didn't, and I think they took my silence as alignment. It wasn't, it was observation. When Lily was born, everything got sharper and stranger at the same time. Eleanor swooped in with opinions about everything: names, nurseries, feeding schedules, schooling. She referred to Lily as our granddaughter, with a possessiveness that made the word feel like a territorial flag. Lily looked like me, dark hair, brown eyes, high cheekbones from my Colombian grandmother, and I noticed early that Eleanor seemed mildly disappointed by this. She commented once, when Lily was a toddler, that the Hargrove coloring tends to assert itself eventually, and I remember standing at the kitchen island, just staring at her, wondering what exactly I was supposed to say to that. Philip by then had begun the long, slow migration that I can now trace in retrospect. More dinners at his parents' house without me, more phone calls taken in other rooms, more evenings where he was home in body, but somewhere else entirely in every way that mattered. I told myself it was work stress. The Hargrove Development Company was expanding, new projects in Midtown, a massive mixed-use complex in Alpharetta. He was busy. I was raising Lily. I had my own work. I'm a freelance interior designer, and I had built a decent client list in Atlanta's upper-tier market, enough to keep me professionally anchored, which turned out to be the smartest thing I'd ever done without knowing I was doing it. Because when a woman has her own money, no one can take her choices away from her. Here's what I knew by the Monday morning I drove to Nadia's office with a Ziploc bag in my passenger seat. I knew about the hotel receipt. I knew that Philip had changed his phone passcode 6 weeks ago and started deleting his call history. I knew that Eleanor had made comments, more than once, about Lily's temperament being difficult. This for a child who is, by every objective measure, gentle, imaginative, and kind. I knew that Conrad had once, during an argument Philip and I had about money, told his son in front of me, "You know you can always come home," not "work it out," not "she has a point." "You can always come home," as if I were a temporary inconvenience in his son's real life. And I knew in the bone-deep way that women in bad situations often know things they haven't yet given themselves permission to act on, that something darker than I fully understood was happening inside this family. Nadia met me at the door of her office herself, which she never does. She had a legal pad, a coffee for me, and an expression I had never seen on her face before: careful, electric, like a person who has just spotted the opening move of a very complex game. I put the bag on her desk. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she said, "I need you to tell me everything. Everything you've noticed for the past 2 years. I need names, dates, conversations, anything you wrote down, anything you photographed." I pulled out my phone and I opened the folder labeled Recipes. By the time I finished, Nadia had filled 11 pages of her legal pad, and she was looking at me with something that was almost respect. "Margaret," she said, setting her pen down carefully, "you have been building this case without knowing it." She told me the birthday dinner was significant not just emotionally, but legally, that what Conrad Hargrove did constituted emotional abuse of a minor in the presence of witnesses, that the witnesses' silence could be argued as complicity, that combined with Philip's clear pattern of behavior and whatever was on that hotel receipt, we had the beginning of a very strong custody case. She told me she wanted to hire a private investigator for the Lowe's hotel lead. She told me she wanted a forensic accountant to look at Philip's financials, because in her experience, when a man of means keeps secrets from his wife, the secrets are rarely just romantic. And she told me very carefully that I should go home, say nothing, change nothing, and let her do her job. I drove back to Buckhead in a strange, humming silence. The Atlanta skyline was doing that golden afternoon thing it does in October, all warmth and sharpness, and the city looked exactly as it always does, beautiful and indifferent and full of stories it isn't telling you. I picked Lily up from school. She showed me a drawing she'd made of a birthday cake with 9 candles. She said she was going to make one for real when she was old enough to bake. I told her she could start learning this weekend. And that was the last ordinary day for a very long time, because 3 days later, the investigator Nadia hired sent the first report, and what was in it was not what I expected. It was worse. It was so much worse that I had to sit down on the bathroom floor and breathe through it for 10 minutes before I could think straight again. And it wasn't just about Philip. It was about the whole family. It was about what the Hargrove empire was actually built on. And it was about why they had served my daughter dog food on her birthday, why Eleanor's cruelty had a pattern, why Conrad had always looked at me like I was a problem that hadn't been solved yet. They weren't just mean, they were afraid of me, and they had very good reason to be. Because the thing I didn't know, the thing Nadia's investigator found buried in county probate records from 12 years ago, was that Philip's first marriage hadn't ended in divorce. It had ended in an annulment that Conrad Hargrove paid $300,000 to seal. And the first wife? She wasn't gone. She was in Atlanta. She had been in Atlanta this entire time. And she had a daughter who was now 13 years old, a daughter whose name was in those sealed records, a daughter whose existence would unravel everything the Hargroves had spent a decade building, every financial structure, every inheritance clause, every carefully constructed public image. And her name, her daughter's name, was the last word on the last page of that report. I picked up my phone. I called Nadia. I said, "I found the thread." She said, "Good, now don't pull it yet." I said, "I'm not. I'm measuring how long it is first." There was a pause. Then Nadia said, quietly, "Margaret, when we pull it, everything unravels." I looked out the window at the Buckhead skyline, at the city where I had rebuilt myself from a Decatur girl with a design degree into a woman standing in a glass house full of secrets that weren't hers. I thought about Lily in her yellow birthday dress. I thought about the paper plate. I thought about Conrad Hargrove's voice, flat, certain, so unafraid of the consequence because he had never once faced one. "Good," I said. "It's supposed to. Some women get even. I got documentation." The weeks after I found the investigator's report were the most disciplined of my life. I am not a naturally patient person. Anyone who knows me will tell you I feel things fast and hard and without apology, but something locked down inside me the morning I read that last line on that last page, and it didn't unlock until I was ready. I went to yoga. I attended Lily's school play. I made dinner 3 times a week and let Philip sit across from me at our kitchen island talking about zoning permits and Fenton Briggs's new boat like he was a man with nothing to hide. He was a good actor. So was I. The difference was I knew we were in a performance. He thought it was real life. Nadia moved fast once we had the thread. The private investigator, a compact, sharp-eyed woman named Renata, who dressed like an insurance adjuster and thought like a chess grandmaster, had done the initial digging, but what she found opened into something that needed a second specialist. Nadia brought in a forensic accountant named Patrick Lyle, who wore reading glasses on a chain and communicated exclusively through spreadsheets and loaded silences. Within 3 weeks, Patrick had identified a pattern of financial transfers from Hargrove Development LLC to 3 shell companies that ultimately funneled money to a private trust, a trust established in 2013 in the name of Conrad William Hargrove Jr. Conrad Jr. didn't appear anywhere in the Hargrove family's public narrative. He wasn't at the birthday dinner. He wasn't on the company's website. He wasn't mentioned at any Hargrove event I had attended in 11 years. But he existed, and his existence was costing the Hargrove family a lot of carefully laundered money to maintain the illusion that he didn't. Here's what Renata pieced together working from the sealed annulment records, old property transfers, and a source she declined to name, but who I suspected was a paralegal at the firm that handled the original annulment. Philip had married a woman named Sasha Trevelyan in 2007. They had been together 3 years before that. Sasha was from a middle-class family in Savannah. Not the polished Savannah of horse-drawn carriages and historic homes, but the working side, the real side, the side that doesn't get photographed. She was smart, warm, and deeply in love with a man she didn't yet understand. Philip had been, apparently, very good at the charming and listening thing long before I experienced it. When Sasha got pregnant, Conrad Hargrove did what Conrad Hargrove does. He calculated the liability and eliminated it. He paid Sasha to sign an annulment agreement that included a non-disclosure clause, a sealed court record, and a structured financial settlement, enough to provide for her and the child comfortably with conditions attached that amounted to permanent silence. The child, the 13-year-old girl in the sealed records, was named Violet Trevelyan, Philip's biological daughter. A child who, under Georgia probate law, had legal standing to a portion of any inheritance from her biological father, regardless of what a sealed civil agreement said, because you cannot sign away a minor's inheritance rights in a private contract when those rights are established by state law. Nadia explained this to me sitting across from each other at her conference table with Patrick's spreadsheets between us and the Ziploc bag containing the paper plate with the mound of dried dog food that 8 witnesses could confirm had been placed in front of a 9-year-old child at her birthday dinner by her paternal grandfather while her father watched in silence. Photographs of the Lowe's hotel receipt, screenshots of deleted texts recovered by a digital forensic specialist Renata brought in during the 3rd week, texts between Philip and a woman named Brooke, who was not Sasha Trevelyan and was also not me, and was, it emerged, Fenton Briggs' wife Claudette's younger sister, which added a layer of social and professional treachery to the situation that I genuinely had not anticipated, and which made Nadia actually laugh out loud for approximately 4 seconds before she returned to her legal pad. The Hargroves had spent 11 years underestimating me. They were about to get a very thorough education. Nadia filed the divorce petition on a Thursday morning in February. I know the exact time because I was at Lily's school for a Valentine's Day craft fair when my phone buzzed with her confirmation text, and I was hot gluing a construction paper heart while the notification came through, and I thought, how poetic. Philip was served at his office at Hargrove Development at 2 in the afternoon. I know this because Renata positioned herself in the parking deck across the street with a camera lens, and I have the photographs of his face when he took the envelope. The way the color left it, the way his hand went to the back of his neck, the way he stood in the parking lot for a full 3 minutes without moving. I look at those photographs sometimes, not to be cruel, to remind myself that I did not imagine the marriage I was in. Conrad called me within 45 minutes of service. He didn't know I knew about Violet. He didn't know I knew about the shell companies. He didn't know about Patrick's spreadsheets or Renata's reports or the digital forensics. He called and he used a voice I had never heard from him before. Low, careful, the voice of a man who has spotted danger and is deciding how to neutralize it. He said, "Margaret, let's be adults about this. There is a way to handle this that protects everyone." I let him talk for 4 minutes. I said, "Conrad, I appreciate the call." I hung up. I texted Nadia the timestamp. 20 minutes later, Eleanor called. She cried. It was, I have to say, a genuinely impressive performance. She talked about family, about Lily needing her grandparents, about how these things happen in marriages, and how I was throwing away everything over something that could be worked through. She said she hoped I wasn't making a decision based on one dinner, as if that was what it was, as if the paper plate was a mistake and not a message. I let her talk too. I said, "Eleanor, I love you. I hope we can work this out." Then I hung up and drove to Nadia's office, and we spent 3 hours finalizing the deposition strategy. The deposition of Philip Hargrove took place on a Tuesday in March. It was held in a conference room at Nadia's firm, with Philip's attorney, a pinstripe type named Gerald Foss, who had handled Hargrove family legal matters for 15 years, sitting beside him like a stone wall. Nadia is 5'4" and weighs maybe 130 pounds, and she walked into that room looking like she was running an errand, carrying a stack of folders and a coffee thermos. Gerald Foss visibly relaxed when he saw her. I have watched men underestimate Nadia my entire adult life. It never gets less satisfying to watch what happens next. She started with the basics: marriage, finances, Lily's custody arrangements. Calm, methodical, nothing alarming. Gerald Foss started checking his phone around the 40-minute mark. Then Nadia slid a photograph across the table, the Lowe's hotel receipt. Philip looked at it. He looked at Gerald. Gerald said, "My client declines." Nadia slid another photograph, the texts with Brooke. Another, the shell company transfers. Another, the trust established in 2013. The room temperature seemed to drop. Philip's jaw tightened. Gerald said, sharply, "We need a recess." Nadia said, pleasantly, "Of course. Oh, and Gerald, we'll be introducing this into evidence as well." She reached back to the credenza behind her, and she set the Ziploc bag on the table. The paper plate, dried dog food, paper thin, 8 witnesses, 1 lawyer's office, 1 exhibit sticker. Philip looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me. I was seated at the far end of the table, not as a participant, just as a person Nadia had allowed to be present, and I had not moved or spoken this entire time. And something happened in his face that I had never seen in 11 years. I don't have a perfect word for it. It was something between recognition and shame, which is a combination that arrives very late in some people, if it arrives at all. "Exhibit A," Nadia said quietly, "from Lily's 9th birthday dinner, witnessed by 8 individuals, including Fenton Briggs and his wife, who have already agreed to provide statements." She opened her folder. "We also have a statement from your daughter, Violet Trevelyan, who has retained her own counsel." The room went completely still. Gerald Foss set his phone face down on the table. Philip said very quietly, "How?" It wasn't a question, really. It was more like a man watching a building ye thought was impenetrable come down and trying to understand the physics of it. Nadia said, "Sasha Trevelyan reached out to us. Once she learned about the birthday dinner, once she learned what was done to Lily, she decided that 11 years of silence was enough." She paused. "She also connected us with Violet, who is 13 now and has opinions about her father that she is legally entitled to express." Here's the thing nobody tells you about revenge. The best kind doesn't feel like fire. It feels like light, like turning on a lamp in a room that has been dark for a very long time and finally seeing everything exactly as it is. I had expected rage in that conference room. I felt something calmer and stranger, something that felt actually like relief, like the long exhale after holding your breath longer than the body was designed to hold it. And we were not finished. 2 weeks after the deposition, Patrick Lyle's forensic accounting report was submitted to both the IRS and the Georgia Department of Revenue, along with a voluntary disclosure filing that Nadia had negotiated on my behalf. I had technically been a joint filer on our taxes for 11 years, and the voluntary disclosure protected me from liability while focusing the investigation squarely on Hargrove Development and the shell companies that Conrad and Philip had operated together. The day the summons arrived at Hargrove Development's Midtown offices, Fenton Briggs was there for a meeting. He drove directly to his lawyer's office afterward and began cooperating with investigators by the following Monday. Loyalty in that family lasted exactly as long as it was personally convenient. Eleanor called me one more time. It was a Sunday morning in April, and I was at my kitchen island with Lily, teaching her how to make pancakes. She had decided, after research, that blueberry lemon was the best flavor combination, and she was right. And Eleanor's name came up on my phone, and I looked at it for a moment, and then I set it face down on the counter, and I told my daughter that the first pancake is always a test pancake. It never comes out perfect, and that's okay. And she laughed and said, "So the first one doesn't count?" And I said, "The first one always counts. It just teaches you how to make the second one better." I did not call Eleanor back. The divorce was finalized in June. Nadia is, without exaggeration, the best attorney in the state of Georgia, and what she negotiated in that settlement reads like a list of victories that I still sometimes need to look at to believe. Full primary custody of Lily, with supervised visitation for Philip, contingent on completion of a family therapy program. The house in Buckhead, which I could sell or keep at my discretion. A financial settlement that reflected both the length of the marriage and the forensic accountant's documentation of assets Philip had obscured, a number I won't state specifically, but which is enough that my mother cried when she heard it, not from grief this time, from shock. A formal legal acknowledgement entered into the public record of the events of Lily's 9th birthday dinner, the paper plate, Conrad Hargrove's words, Philip's silence, not sealed, public, searchable. Eleanor Trevelyan, through her own legal attorney, filed a separate civil action against the Hargrove estate for her legal inheritance share under Georgia probate law. Sasha Trevelyan, released from her NDA by the terms of the divorce-related discovery, gave an interview to an Atlanta journalist that ran online on a Thursday morning and had 30,000 views by Friday noon. Conrad Hargrove's attorney issued a statement. Nobody cared about the statement. They cared about Sasha's face in the photograph, dignified, steady, unbothered, and they cared about the line she said that people kept quoting online. I stayed quiet for 13 years because I thought silence would protect my daughter. It didn't. What protected her was another woman refusing to stay quiet for her daughter. She was talking about me, and I want to be honest, I cried when I read that. Ugly cried, the kind that happens when something lands in exactly the right place. Conrad Hargrove stepped down from the board of Hargrove Development in August, pending the outcome of the tax investigation. Gerald Foss quietly withdrew from representing the family. Rosalind, Philip's sister, issued a personal statement on her social media distancing herself from her father's actions, which I thought was equal parts cowardly and self-interested, and also, frankly, not my problem. Fenton Briggs cooperated fully with investigators, as predicted. Claudette Briggs filed for divorce from Fenton in September, which, given what I knew about her sister and Philip, struck me as somewhat circular, but ultimately none of my business. Philip, to his credit, and I say this with no softness, only fairness, eventually entered the therapy program. He has, I am told, begun building a relationship with Violet, slowly, at her pace and with her considerable say in the matter. I don't know how that story ends. It's not my story anymore. But Violet is a real person, and she deserves a father who shows up. And if Philip can manage to be that person for her, if being finally, publicly, unavoidably accountable for who he's been makes him into someone better, then that is, somehow, also a form of justice. Lily started 4th grade in September. She made the school's Young Readers Club, and she has decided she wants to be a marine biologist, which she chose specifically because, she told me, oceans are bigger than anything and nobody owns them. I didn't tell her that made me want to cry. I just told her that was the best reason I had ever heard to study anything. We sold the Buckhead house in October and bought a place in Decatur, smaller, full of light, with a backyard where Lily can have a garden. My mother came for Thanksgiving. She and Lily made pie together from scratch. My father sat at the kitchen table and told bad jokes and played cards with Lily and ate 2 slices of pie before dinner, which is technically against the rules, but which I allowed completely. Rosa, the Hargroves housekeeper, who had, it emerged, told Renata some very useful things in a conversation that happened in a parking lot 2 blocks from the Tuxedo Park estate on a Tuesday afternoon. I helped Rosa find a new position with a family in Ansley Park who treat their staff like people. She sent me a text on Christmas morning that was just a red heart emoji. I sent one back. The paper plate, Exhibit A, sits in a shadow box in my office now. Nadia had it preserved in a way that sounds complicated and archival. The Ziploc bag is gone. The plate is mounted on white linen behind museum glass in a black frame. It is the first thing I see when I walk into my workspace in the morning. People who come to my office for design consultations sometimes notice it and ask what it is. I tell them it's a reminder. They usually think I mean a reminder of something sad. What it actually reminds me of is this: the moment I stopped waiting for the room to validate what I already knew. Because here's the truth that took me 11 years and 1 paper plate to fully understand. Power doesn't announce itself. It shows itself in what it's willing to do to the smallest, most defenseless person in the room, and in who watches it happen and says nothing. The ones who say nothing are always telling you everything you need to know. Conrad Hargrove looked at my 9-year-old daughter on her birthday and told her to eat dog food or starve. 8 people heard it. 1 person left. 1 person kept the plate. 1 person walked into a lawyer's office and laid it on a conference table and said, "This is where it starts." And that person was me. And when the jury eventually saw it, in the civil trial on the inheritance claim that Violet brought forward, the trial that ran 6 days in a Fulton County courtroom and ended with a verdict that rearranged the Hargrove family's financial future in ways Conrad's attorneys are still trying to manage, they were quiet for a long time. The paper plate, the dried dog food, the birthday dress in the photograph Nadia showed the court, the 8 witnesses, the father who said nothing, the grandfather who smiled. Violet was in the courtroom that day. She sat 2 rows behind me, and she is, I have to tell you, extraordinary. Dark-haired, composed, with a directness in her eyes that reminded me instantly and painfully of my daughter. We had met, briefly, at Nadia's office in May. She had shaken my hand very formally for a 13-year-old and said, "Thank you for not backing down." I had told her she didn't need to thank me. She said, "I know, I wanted to anyway." When the verdict came in, when the foreman read it and I heard the words that meant Violet Trevelyan would receive what she was owed under the law, what had been hidden from her for 13 years, I turned around and looked at her. And this girl, this 13-year-old daughter of a woman who had stayed quiet for too long and a man who had pretended she didn't exist, looked back at me with the steadiest, most clear-eyed expression I have ever seen on a human face, and she nodded once. I nodded back, and that was enough. That was, actually, everything. I am Margaret Calloway Hargrove, and soon just Calloway again, because I am in the process of reclaiming the name I came in with, and I want you to know something if you take nothing else from what I've told you. The moments they expect you to break are the exact moments you cannot afford to. Not because breaking is weak, because they are counting on it. They need you to break so the story becomes about your reaction instead of their action. So you don't break. You breathe. You take the plate. You walk to your car. You call your best friend. You write everything down. You find a Ziploc bag. You wait. And then you walk into the room they never thought you'd walk into, and you lay it all on the table, and you let the truth do what the truth, when it's finally given enough room, always does. It levels everything. And then, only then, you go home and you make blueberry lemon pancakes, and you eat the first one, the test one, the one that didn't come out perfect, and you tell your daughter it still counts, because it always does, because everything that didn't come out right was part of learning how to get it right, because the story was never about the dog food, the story was about who you were after, and we were always going to win.
Take a moment to comment your city or country. I love connecting with you all. Thank you for listening and supporting, and be sure to subscribe for more stories. More are coming your way soon. Until next time, stay kind to yourself and stay strong.